Hey, just a heads up that the following content may be disturbing or triggering for some listeners and is not appropriate for children. Please take care of yourself and others who may be listening with you. Welcome to the Bonus Babies Podcast, a show that has no easy answers, only hard questions.
I handed over what documents I had. These were all documents that came out of my search 10 years previous with my colleague. And she did manage to find my father. Like 2 weeks later, I'm driving in the car, just left my office. I'm on the 101, and she says, keep driving if you want to go meet your father. Your father lives in Thousand Oaks. And so I did.
Can you tell me what you call the kids who you've cared for over the years?
We feel that the children that we receive coming into our home are bonuses. So we call them bonus babies.
I love that. This is your host, Jayne Amelia Larson, and I'm a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate volunteer for youth in foster care. Yeah, I know it's a mouthful. In the same way a CASA works, I explore all things in the foster care maze by talking to kids, parents, caregivers, attorneys, social workers, therapists, really anybody and everybody who will speak to me to keep the conversation open and the information flowing about all things CASA.
This is Jake Eberly, the producer of the Bonus Babies podcast, and today Jayne speaks with David Hudson. David Hudson is actually an old high school friend, and I knew he was adopted and posed the question to see if he'd be interested in doing the show, and he was game. And today I learned quite a bit. And what struck me most about this is how incredibly unique all of our families are, and that there are so many stories to tell. So I hope you find it as compelling as I do.
Okay, hey, I'm here with Dave Hudson. Hey, Dave.
Hey, how are you, Jayne?
I'm good. All right, so let's just jump in, Dave. Tell me a little bit about who you are, where you're from.
Sure. Born in L.A., raised abroad in India and Israel as a child in the 60s and early 70s, made our way back to Massachusetts. This is all due to my parents, my adoptive parents.
Right, so you're adopted, right?
I am.
Yeah, and so your parents traveled for work, for school?
Correct.
What did they do? Mm-hmm.
Correct. Both were academians. My father's field of study was religious studies, and my mother's field of study was religious studies, women's studies, and anthropology.
Mm-hmm. And so then you came back to the United States when you were a little boy? How old were you?
That's correct. I think I was, I want to say 7 years old.
Right, and then something happened around then. What was it?
Well, funny you should ask. The realization that I was not like my family. I am of darker tone than my family. My family consisted of my mother, my father, and my older sister, a year and a half older than I was. She was biologically born within the family. And spending time abroad in sunny places, everybody was tanned, and I'm not particularly dark. But the realization of the fact that I was of a different race came about in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at the young age of 7.
And what was it that happened? Because you did not know that you were adopted until then.
I did not. And another young boy had referred to me using the N-word.
Wow.
And I did not know what that meant. And so I made it home. When I made it home, I asked my parents what that meant. And I think that began the process of the discussion around my adoption and the fact that I was not biologically their son.
Were you able to understand at that age that you were adopted and presumably wanted, as opposed to not being wanted by your bio family?
Right. Well-posed question. So, I don't think it fully registered initially, and there were subsequent conversations into 8, 9, and 10, and 11. And I think that's when I was evolved enough to understand that aspect. But I did feel as though I was wanted. I think the time at which that sort of felt challenged had nothing to do with my race and had nothing to do really with the relationship that I had with my parents. But it did become challenged when my parents were in process of divorce.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, that happened too.
Yeah. Oh, a lot happened.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
Yeah.
how if I can really get into this, because the divorce side of it too was also messy.
Right. So what happened? How old were you when that happened?
I believe that I was 10 or 11 years old.
And I believe there's no good age. So
Yeah.
whether it's 2, 10, or 20, it still sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I'm a little hesitant to go into the details, but I guess, you know, my mother had an affair with one of my father's students. My father was a professor at Smith College, which is an all-women's college. This was during the 70s, and the lesbian population in Northampton, where Smith College is, was quite large. In fact, I think per capita, at some point I researched it, it was akin to San Francisco and its gay population.
I think that's still true, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, and it caused quite a stir because, you know, there was always this undertone of uneasiness between this Western Massachusetts town, which was largely made up of second-generation immigrants from Germany, Poland, and Ireland. It's a farming town, and it also is home to the Five College area, which is inclusive of Smith College, Mount Holyoke, Hampshire College, University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and Amherst College. So I would always refer to it as an oasis, you know, in that area, a highly educated area, and people come from all over the world. And but it was a struggle in the town, and there's all these sort of metaphors associated with it. I remember that my mother moved to the other side of the train tracks because on one side of the train tracks existed Smith College and its whole community, and the other side, blue-collar workers from Northampton, locals. And so there was just a lot going on. I was in the midst of puberty. I was one of 3 dark-skinned kids in my class. Everybody else was white. I was embarrassed.
You're right. Did you know that your mom had an affair with a woman, or did you just know that something was amiss in the house?
I knew something was wrong, pretty intuitive. Wow, I'm really going to say this. I found my mother in bed with another woman. And that was the moment at which, you know, all the things that I had sort of thought about came to light. And I think all along, my mother was in a bit of denial. Even, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but 20 some odd years later, she still referred to herself as bisexual. And yet she had not had a relationship with a man post that initial affair.
So, all right. So that happened. You walked in on your mom. What was it like with your dad then? Like, did you feel you wanted to defend him? Did you feel like you were like, Mom, just don't do that. Don't let it happen. Take it all back.
So as I remember it, my mom wanted my father to understand it and wanted to allow for the relationship to continue. My father, I remember him moving down to the guest room. I remember episodes of staying up at night and sitting at the top of the stairs listening to the two of them argue. I think I was too young to really understand what was being said. At the same time, I was more perceptive than I thought I probably was. And the thing about it was I was closest to my mom. My father was a complete workaholic, and, you know, very fond memories of growing up and playing games with my mother, you know, board games, card games, spending a majority of my time with my mother because my father was absent quite a bit.
And then what happened when your parents split? Did they fight over you? Did you have to choose? Did you?
So, you know, I wasn't at any of the court proceedings, but I think it was a fairly involved court proceeding, custody battle, as I think that the state took the position that my mother was unfit.
Wow, really?
To be.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, this is part of the struggle of the community and the times. You've got to remember this is early 70s to mid 70s. And I think that ultimately my father told the court her sexuality has nothing to do with her ability to be a mother.
Wow. So your dad stood up for your mom.
In that instance, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was shared custody. And so we would go back, my sister and I think it started like every 2 weeks, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. I think I lasted about a year and a half. And I remember to this day being in the backseat of the car, outstretched, holding my arms against one door and my legs pushing against the other door and refusing to go into my mother's home. And from that point on, I lived with my father for the rest of his life, apart from when I became adult and moved on.
Right. So they honored your decision to want to remain with your dad.
Yeah. There were a number of people. I remember my grandmother, her mother, coming to my father's house and again sitting at the top of the stairs and hearing my father and, argue with my grandmother.
Isn't it strange how kids so often they're on the periphery and they're hearing things and they're not necessarily understanding it.
Right.
Sometimes they understand it intuitively.
Right.
They get the feeling of what's happening.
Right.
They can't do anything about it. There's no control.
That's correct.
And you're just
That's correct.
perched at the top of the stairs, hoping it's not going to get worse.
Right. Right. And definitely not exposing myself to knowing that I'm there.
So what happened with you and your mom?
So my mom and I struggled for years, and we would go weeks, months on end of not speaking. Developed a very close relationship with my father. My sister would continue to go back and forth. My sister discovered, I think about the age of 14, 15, also that she was gay, and I think that was difficult. And I remember when I was living with my mother, weekends were spent in a community in South Hadley, which housed Mount Holyoke College.
Right. Also one of Seven Sisters. Yeah.
Seven Sisters. My relationship with my mother extended to weekends where I would go to her softball games, which was organized lesbian league.
Classic.
I would spend great. My weekends. Yeah. I mean, it's trippy. 20 lesbian women and myself.
Uh-huh.
And, the appeal for me was I was quite an athlete.
Organized lesbian. That sounds
a
little fierce. So
it was.
Right. Was your mom an athlete as well?
She was. She was an athlete. Mm-hmm.
And did you participate in that? Were you like the ball boy or something?
I can't remember exactly.
Oh, come on.
I can't remember.
Really?
No,
you didn't do that?
I can't.
They would have been
No,
classic.
I don't think I got to play. But but I was a baseball player, I was the guy. There's newspaper clippings and all of that, Little League, Babe Ruth. So I was being groomed. Yeah, I don't think I was allowed to play, but I liked being around sports activities. And some of these players were also Smith College students and would babysit for me often. I remember Kathy and Alexis, who were partners, who I just loved. They were cool, and they were athletes. I think one was a geologist, and I can't, I have distant memories. Somebody who could really speak to this is my sister.
Right. So when you say you really loved them, it wasn't like you had a crush on them. You just really liked their company and wanted to be around them.
No, I actually had a crush on Kathy.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah, that happens.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I know in life that I have a tendency to be attracted to strong women. That's like like my thing is strong and eyes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. The rest of this stuff really doesn't matter to me. Just saying.
Women love to hear stuff like that. So even if that's not true, if you just use that line, right? They just start falling at your feet.
Yeah.
So,
2 divorces later and 3 daughters.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. So as you're growing up, you're an adolescent, you're figuring out who you are, you're adopted. You knew your parents loved you. They're even fighting over you. Did the way that you thought about adoption at that time change at all? Or was it still just, I'm in a family that loves me and they're fighting about me?
Yeah, I knew, I was aware of the love, and just, that, yes, I wasn't preoccupied with anything other than their situation and my situation relative to their situation. I never really thought. I did later on develop a desire to meet my mother,
Your
which
bio mom.
my bio mom, which I discussed with my father, more than anything to thank her for not aborting me. Like it was that point where I had realized, given the time, I was a little bit more evolved. And so we're talking mid to latter teen years where I sort of developed this sense of, I would like to meet my mother. There was also conversation in my early 20s, recollection in conversation with my mother of the court proceedings in Los Angeles. And there's the moments I remember in my early teens, my parents sharing with me my birth certificate, which has me listed as Caucasian, by the way. And I'm going to sort of speed forward a bit. And then ultimately, when I moved back to Los Angeles and I was in the entertainment industry, the person who was my boss, she too was adopted, and we both decided to go and look for our biological family. Now,
Yeah. How did you do that? How did you meet?
so we went down to City Hall and records, because at that time, all of the records existed on microfiche. So that's all that was there. And
Like you had to scroll through like the microfiche, right?
Yeah, we had to do some of that. But what ended up happening, and this again was associated with my work, we found the guy who was the keeper of all the microfiche, and was still alive at the age of 80 something, almost 90. And I remember having a phone conversation with him, because all of this, the easiest way to track things is through Social Security numbers. The hospital that I was born in, presumably in Watts, no longer existed. I also was born in a time period, so I fell in some gray area from a legal standpoint that I couldn't get the information about my, it wasn't public record, it wasn't even private record, and all I was working off was a letter from the adoptive agency worker. Her name was, oddly enough, Althea Gibson. I ended up speaking to her as well before she passed. Just sort of, and this guy who was like the king of microfiche, he had all of these files that while there were copies of it in the City Hall, they were not complete. And he had the complete set, I guess, for the United States. And cut to 20 years later, and the introduction of a woman by the name of Pam Slaton, who came in and pitched a television show to me, proceeded to have several people walk in and talk about their stories. And at a certain point, I think 2 hours into the pitch, I revealed that I was adopted, and Pam Slaton then took my information. And 2 weeks later, she had found my biological father.
Wow. It took her 2 weeks.
It took her 2 weeks to find my father. It took her 5 years plus to find my mother.
And you ended up in touch with them?
And my mother passed. So I moved back to LA in 1989. So I would have been 24 years old. And she died in 99. And it was probably 95 or 96 when I actually went through this process with my colleague. And I found, it was easier to find his name. And we found what we thought was her name, but it was very hard to really sort of decipher. His name was, and my name associated with my birth certificate was Baby Boy. I was listed as Caucasian. Presumably it had the right birth date. My understanding is that I was born in Watts, and I spent a period of time, I'm not exactly sure, in an orphanage post coming out of the hospital. And the name that I found out once I spoke to the guy with the microfiche was, and it really wasn't until I met my biological father that certain things sort of started clicking.
Like what?
Well, there is sort of had been rumor or suspicion that my mother was foreign, that my mother lived in Germany near the Polish border and was Jewish and a survivor of the Holocaust. And the recollection that my father, when I asked him about it, was that she did in fact have tattoos, numbers on her arm.
Did your dad know that he had a child that your mom gave up?
No, apparently not. It depends on who you ask in the family.
So the stories vary.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, the stories vary. His sister, who would be my aunt, very protective of him. When I met him, so Pam calls me, right? She comes in, she pitches this show. I want to buy it. My boss doesn't let me buy it. I pick up the phone call because I happen to know the person who's running Oprah's network. I pitch it to her. She buys it on the call. Tell Pam, call such and such person. And they made a deal a week later, and they did a show called Search that I think lasted a season, maybe two, but I think it was one season. Pam and I obviously befriended each other within that 2-hour pitch session. I handed over what documents I had. These were all documents that came out of my search 10 years previous with my colleague. And she did manage to find my father. Like 2 weeks later, I'm driving in the car, just left my office. I'm on the 101, and she says, keep driving if you want to go meet your father. Your father lives in Thousand Oaks.
Wow.
And so I did. She had contacted him. He was open to meeting me. I met.
Right then?
Yeah.
Right then,
Yep.
as soon as you found out?
Drove to his house. He looked at me. I looked at him. You know, it was pretty much undeniable that we look a lot alike. I sat with him and his wife. And she apparently, I found out later, was his 5th marriage. Yeah.
Oh, so the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Well, I'm only on 2, and I'm not getting married again. That apple's rolled a little bit away from the tree, I would think. But what it did, it did, you know, for me, I think it was impactful in that I wasn't, you know, I had heard stories, again, through my father and my mother around the adoption proceedings back in 1965, 66. My sense was my father had nothing to do with me, and that I was, you know, born in secrecy. But somehow I had this sense that my mother cared greatly for me, and that it was a decision that was very difficult for her. I don't know where that came from, but what's really cool is when I get to the part when I actually meet my siblings, my sisters from my mother, and another marriage, that she was in fact very keen on understanding who I was and who I was with. So I'll get to that in a second. So I meet my father, and I really enjoyed his wife. I didn't enjoy him so much. It was challenging, but I think I had some preconceived notions going into the meeting that probably didn't play well. I did discover in that first meeting that I had a brother and a sister. The brother was incarcerated, I think, in prison for life, and that he had cut ties with that brother. I don't think he had much of a relationship with that guy. Presumably, he was my half brother. Yeah, it appeared to me that I don't know if it was a bit of a game, but I think my sense was that my father struggles with the responsibility. You know, things like married 5 times, kind of like, are you really my son? What do you want? And I'm like, you kind of don't need anything, want anything from you. Just the sense that he was sort of almost boasting about the fact that he had cut ties with his son. These were all sort of triggers for me of like, yeah, this is all kind of what I imagined and why you were never a part of this. And so on and so forth. That said, I did continue to try to have a relationship with him and the larger family. I remember going to several get-togethers in which I met what would be cousins. The remarkable thing is they looked familiar, and, we talked through that, and more than likely seen each other in passing, Santa Monica Promenade or here or there, because they all lived in the LA area as well.
Right. And how did you feel about having this whole new family?
It was good, but it was just a little bit odd because everybody was so incredibly protective about him. And the way this story sort of ends in my relationship with him is that through conversations with my mother, adoptive mother, who I just referred to as my mother, who is an anthropologist, who once found this information, has completely researched the family dating back to the slave ship, which they arrived on in the States, and the fact that, they all emanate from the Nashville, Tennessee area, that in a conversation with my father's sister, I think I referred to her earlier in the conversation, that my aunt, that my father said, well, I'm not entirely sure he's mine because my brother slept with her as well. So,
wow,
yeah,
Dave.
yeah. So you're kind of like, I'm going to swear, kind of like, fuck you, right? It's sort of like, and that's sort of, I guess the responsibility and all of that, married 5 times, just sort of like flashing, just like, I didn't really want it. The bar is extremely high, remind you. My father, my adoptive father, has passed away at this point. And my adoptive father, is my best friend, my guru, period. This guy, my adoptive father, is the spitting image of Paul Newman. Blonde, blue-eyed, one of 4 boys from Southern California, had no business adopting a black kid. In fact, the response that his father said to my mother, later revealed in a conversation with my uncle 6 days before he died. This is all on my father's brother, adoptive again, my grandfather, Pop, who I was very fond of, but always knew there was a sense of, the response when my mother called my father's father, my grandfather, said, you're gonna adopt that nigger boy, right? And, just the racism and the culture and the time and so on and so forth. And so lots of things sort of like, if you sort of, my father was one of 4 boys. He was number 2. 3 of the 4 boys went into armed services, served Korea and Vietnam. My father was a conscientious objector. My father, and it was a battle. It was a battle that I can remember since the beginning of time, just a sense of hostility. He very clearly was my grandmother, Nana's favorite. Extremely bright, went to Oberlin, concert pianist. That's what put him through school. Just an amazing guy. Just an amazing guy. So I don't know, I just departed from.
Have you ever wondered, Dave, what your life would have been like if
yes,
your mom had kept you?
So I do. And I think that, so let me just sort of back up here. So I meet my father, we'll call him Father. We spend time over the course of 3 or 4 months.
Sorry, I love that.
Well, just versus Father Hudson, right?
That's right.
And,
that's right.
We spend time over the course of, I don't know, half a year interacting, introducing at that time my second wife and their kids, my daughter from my first marriage, and have dinners occasionally and so on and so forth. And it all stops once he makes that comment to my mother, and my mother reveals this to me, and I'm sort of done. All along.
Let me just ask you, hang on one second. So this sounds super hurtful, also very deflating and also demoralizing, and almost like you're disenfranchised once and then
That's
again.
Right. That's right. There's a common theme of abandonment in my life for me, and I think it starts with my mother giving me up and having I was too young, obviously, but that feeling, that sense, and then my mother, who in effect abandons me by having an affair, and that changes the structure and the dynamic of the relationship,
of the family.
and
Changes the
so it's just
family.
sort of that kind of thing. I mean,
and then also she let you choose your dad. Perhaps you wanted her to fight a little harder for you.
Yeah. I mean, yes. I mean, I don't. Again, I keep it pretty simple with my mother, and I think all of the things that my intuition was correct, and I learned so much about my mother from her daughters, two of which are twins and look just like me.
So she had children.
So she had children with another man. And so this is where the story gets interesting and goes back to answer the question of like, what would life have been like if I had stayed with her? Well, probably statistically not good. She remained in the Watts Compton area. Supposedly, she was fairly legendary and was known as the Honky of Compton, a woman who took in a lot of kids and took care of them in battered, drugged, all sorts of situations that were poor. Everybody would come to her house. And this I learned through my sisters. And here's some sort of little interesting anecdotes associated with it. My sisters remember her when she would drink too much, she would cry and sob, and she would mention the name David.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
And then my sisters also remember that they moved from L.A. to Santa Barbara for a very short period of time, exactly the same time that my father went from Claremont, when they first adopted me, to Santa Barbara to teach before we left to go to India. So theory is
she was following you? She would,
yeah,
just so she could get her sights on you every now and then?
and make sure that I was in good standing and all of that. And it's pretty trippy. And so when I have conversations with my sisters, it's pretty amazing. And I just literally got a text from my sister. We don't talk that frequently, but we do talk. And when I'm in town, I try to see her, and we're going to try to see each other this time. Yeah, Tamara and Maria. My mother's first name was Maria. So it was known initially as Maria. It was also a name that was found, Maria, and then ultimately Maria. And that's what took Pam Slaton 5-6 years in order to find my biological mother. And what I do know, because also sort of a religious aspect of this, my father was a theologian, and my parents, when I was first adopted, they were Quakers. Then I remember going to an Episcopal church once my parents divorced, and then my mother and my father both converted to Judaism.
Right. And they did that separately. They didn't do that as a team.
Yeah,
they did it separately.
Yeah. My mother kept kosher. And so my upbringing in my teen years, we were always around Jews, always, Shabbat dinner, Friday nights, all of that. I, participated in all of that, and also then recollected that dating back from the days of Claremont and Santa Barbara, that we had a very close friend of the family, very close to my mother, Irene Eber, who herself was a Holocaust survivor. And so when my mother and I spoke about this aspect of the Holocaust survivor and the realization that, Holocaust survivors, privacy is paramount, and it's very typical that there's name changing and that there's secrecy and that this is part of the fabric of, it's a survival mechanism. As my sisters tell me the story that they learned from their mother, yes, she was in a concentration camp. Likely it was Auschwitz. I think historically Auschwitz people had numbers tattooed on their arms. But I think that there has since been some understanding that it may not have only been Auschwitz.
Right. And have you been able to see a picture of your mom? And
Oh yeah,
when you do, how do you feel about it?
it's cool. It's cool. I mean, you can't totally. I can see that. I think if I were to show you photos, my father has a bit more dominant traits. But then when you look at my sisters, who were of a different father, you cannot. I am literally, my sisters and I look like female and male versions of the same thing.
Mm.
So that's undeniable. Mm-hmm. And every time I get together with my sisters, I inquire and I get a little bit more information. And my mother is a very inquisitive person, and she's asked a lot of questions. But I remember very distinctively one of the first questions I asked was about her Judaism. And they confirmed that she was a Jew, but that at a certain point, they were being raised Christian by her. And that the story is that she and her sister saw right beside them both her parents shot in the head and her brother shot in the head by Nazis. And at a young age, 5 or 6 years old. And that, just little things like my mother, her job in the camp was to peel potatoes. And so she could not even look, smell, or taste potatoes throughout their childhood. She wouldn't have anything to do with potatoes.
What's amazing to me about hearing this, Dave, is that it's like you've spent the last 25 or 30 years piecing together a puzzle, not unlike the way a writer or a screenwriter builds a story, right? That you happen to be a storyteller. That's now your business. But I mean, I wonder if that's part of why you're so good at what you do now, or why perhaps you ended up doing what you're doing now because you've already been doing it since you were
right
a kid, right? Putting together the pieces of the puzzle.
That's exactly right. I think adopted children, depending upon what age they're adopted, but in my case, being adopted at such a young age, there was a very cool fantasy surrounding who might be my parent. Hank Aaron, take your pick. I sort of lived in this fantasy world. I was safe because I know I was loved by my parents, so I could kind of just, in my head roam, and then always wondering about, nature versus nurture, and going through life where nothing was nature. It was my own choice to understand or think of that what was nature. Everything that was relevant or that was happening was nurture. There was no basis for nature. And then you get into later on in your life when you meet half siblings, and sit down and have a meal for the first time. And, fighting over the hot sauce or whatever. I like that taste. Right. Yeah, I like that taste too. It's like so on and so forth. Just little things that you pick up, even though they're half siblings. It's noticeable.
Hey, so how do you has your relationship with your bio dad improved at all?
No, it doesn't exist anymore. I don't have no relationship with that side of the family at all. I have a relationship with my 2 out of my 3 sisters, the twin sisters.
On the mom's side,
right. One of my sisters, who there's a sense of a little bit closer relationship with one more than the other. And she had a son at the age of 13. And so I have a nephew who's just awesome and just had his second baby 2 weeks ago. And I was at his wedding as well as my younger kids went to his wedding. And of course, looks just like me.
Right. So you've been married twice now, and you have a slew of kids. How many kids you got?
I have 3 daughters. 28.
3 daughters. What? Yeah.
First marriage, 28.
Wow. So you were 12 too when that happened? Wow.
I was 29.
Wow. Okay.
29. My first wife
and
was
you have
10
a little
years
kid
my
now
senior.
Too?
My second wife was 14 years my junior. And so with my
Okay, you're getting
second
the
wife,
range.
I
Getting the range.
had 2 daughters.
So have you thought about yourself, about adopting
Oh,
any
for sure.
kids? Oh, you have?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love kids.
And
They call me, in my family, they call me the baby whisperer.
the baby whisperer. That's
Yeah, I'm
that's
particularly
a big
good.
deal.
And I think most of it has to do with the gray beard. Yeah, I don't know.
Right. So you're like a really young, cozy granddaddy.
Yeah, I think
Is that
so.
it?
I think that, for babies,
Yeah.
they can't see much. So this is the facial hair, and I smile a lot, and the bigger lips, and there's just all of that stuff works for them. But I just love babies because, babies aren't racist.
No.
I don't have to work hard
No.
for somebody to love me when they're a baby. They just give me an outpouring of love that I'm accepted, right? It's
Right.
easy. It's a very easy relationship.
So why haven't you adopted then? Because it just hasn't, the timing not good, or
I think it's
don't
economics.
want to do it on you.
And,
Yeah.
I've got 3 daughters, and quite frankly, while this doesn't speak to adoption. One, I'm just increasingly concerned about more children coming into this shitty world we're living in. I am just in great fear of what life will be like for my 11 and 14-year-old. Never mind my 28-year-old.
Right.
And the path that we're taking. Now, that said, I absolutely would love to adopt a child, but that would require it's not something I want to do on my own.
Right. It's hard to do it on your own. Yeah.
Right. And I'm currently involved in a relationship. She's amazing, but I don't know. At my age, I take people in. I don't know if I have to adopt them.
So I want to ask you something that I ask all my guests, and if you can dig deep for
Sure
this.
thing.
What is the one thing that no one would ever know about you unless you told them? And I'm going to give you an example.
You don't have to. I got an answer for you right away.
Okay, perfect.
I can't believe I'm going to say this. Didn't masturbate till I was at the age of 21.
Why not?
Don't know.
It's just, was it something you did not want to do, or you just said, or just you
Kind of
weren't
had
drawn
girlfriends, like you know.
Oh,
the
wait a
whole
minute. You mean
time.
you didn't have
I didn't
to?
have
You
to.
didn't
I
have
guess.
to.
And I didn't. I just don't. I don't. Yeah. It wasn't
Okay,
like
Dave,
you
just
were.
put that out in the world. You put that
I
out
know.
there in
Well,
the world.
we're
just
gonna.
now. You
I'm
didn't.
gonna get. I'm not signing anything. Like we're gonna have to beep some of these things because they're.
Oh no, we got
No. They're
that. That's
names.
classic.
We got to beep names because I can't. Oh, I don't mind sharing with the world that I didn't masturbate till I was 21. That's not an issue.
I think that's
it's
important.
It's more about some of the, my daughter's names and this and that. My mother.
Yeah.
I gotta.
We can
bleep it or
cut
something
that.
like that. But no, I'm not ashamed of that, and whatever. Now that said, once I found that spot, life was good. And it's the go-to in between relationships.
Mm-hmm.
But I do notice that it's like when I'm in a relationship, I just
I know this isn't that kind of show, but
Exactly.
but
I've never shared
I
that
think
with
that's-
anybody.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to share?
No.
You've been holding on to that.
No.
I want to ask you one other thing too. I just want to go back to.
Yeah.
You said that the idea of being abandoned has been kind of a theme for you.
Yeah.
Now, you're not alone in this.
Yes.
I come from a family of 10 children, and I had very absent parents, and I felt abandoned too. But I had 9 brothers and sisters that were constantly in my world. So, do you think that's ever going to go away for you? Is it just that thing that is on your ear always?
No, I think my relationships I think on the one hand, I'm, a champion of girl power. There's a reason why I have 3 daughters.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And there's a reason why, literally in a very large family, there's me and my brother from my father's second marriage. The rest are women. So, that's the world I live in. So in terms of abandonment and my relationships, again, going back, this kind of goes full circle, is that I like, I'm attracted to strong women. But I, as my current girlfriend will tell you, I am challenged when I feel like I don't have their full attention, or that I see a stray eye, or
Really?
yeah, there was an incident with this that was really challenging with this girlfriend. We went out with friends, and my best friend and his now wife, she's bisexual very clearly, and she hit on my girlfriend, and that was okay. But as the night continued on and everybody drank more, and we ended up in a gay bar, and my girlfriend danced very
Closely?
closely, intimately with another stranger who was a lesbian. I walked out.
Yeah, I don't
as they
blame you.
motioned to come over and walk, I lost my shit. And it was a battle royale and sent her home. And it's just, again, a trigger.
Right.
Because for me, it's not even, it doesn't matter male or female, right? It's this whole issue of, I'm a monogamous guy, despite what everybody thinks. I know I'm a flirt, but when you got me, you got me.
Right.
But I'm not, and so I'm equally as challenged within my relationships. Potentially, if a woman, some guys would say, "Oh, that's sexy," and so on and so forth, and they motioned you over to come with me, and I'm like, oh, okay, maybe, it's like not my thing, because I'm like staring at my mother, or I'm not. It's challenging.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think it's probably even harder for me with a female, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I feel
for
more
sure.
challenged with,
Yeah,
like,
because you're opening that door again.
yeah, like I can,
Yeah, but it's really funny about how people, even if you're open-minded, even if you're not possessive, even if you're very secure, we want to have things for ourselves. And I can see how you would want your relationship for yourself and not share it.
yeah, yep.
And that can go back, to early childhood, or it could just be you don't want to share.
Yeah. Although I think, people will tell you I'm one of the most generous people you've ever met. And I know I'm generous.
Right. But we're talking about something else. We're talking
exactly.
about. Yeah.
I'm just referring to kind of surface shit. And like,
Right.
I'll spend my last dime, I just recently had a birthday, and this woman who I had been dating took it upon herself to contact all members of my family, both adoptive and biological, and put together a video. And the realization of how loved I am and how amazing it was just, like if I wasn't so anti-marriage institution, done. She would be
that's sweet.
Yeah,
That's a sweet thing to do.
Yeah. And it was amazing. It really, really is amazing. And the reality is, probably my guess is I wouldn't be alive if I grew up in Compton.
That's what you said earlier.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be alive.
I wouldn't be alive. Chances are pretty good that I would not, especially knowing what my sisters went through.
So your mom saved you, and she gave you a new life. She gave you away, and she gave you a new life.
That's right. And for that, I'm forever indebted and think fondly of her. And then, that was an exclamation point added to that when I met my biological sisters and heard stories like, we remember this, we remember that, and how painful and what a wonderful person she was.
I'm sorry you never had a chance to meet her.
Me
Dave.
too.
Yeah,
Me
I bet
too.
that.
Yeah.
I bet that hurts a lot because
it's just sad. Because
especially because you tried so hard to find her.
Well, yeah, but then just to hug her and say thank you, I'm doing okay. In fact, I'm doing great.
I just want to thank you, Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Jayne.
You're like super forthcoming, and how this all twists and turns and pieces of the puzzle that you're still putting together.
I'm still putting together.
Well, thank you, Dave.
Yeah,
really,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David, for taking the time to share your story with us. I gotta say, man, there's some pretty rich stuff in there. So, thank you. And next week, we're gonna hear from Zaid Gale. Peace for Kids co-founder and executive director. Peace for Kids is a grassroots nonprofit organization that has served thousands of current and former foster youth in South Los Angeles. So needless to say, I'm sure Zaid will be a great resource and have a lot of stories to tell. See you next week, and be well. If you see something, say something. If you suspect a child's health or safety is jeopardized in any way by parents or anyone else, contact the Child Protective Services Agency in your county. 24-hour hotlines are staffed by trained social workers who will help you through the process, and you can do so anonymously. In California, you can call the Child Protection Hotline at 800-540-4000. So if you see something, say something. You might be saving a child's life. If you want to know more about becoming a CASA anywhere in the country, go to nationalcasagal.org. And in LA, casala.org. And if you want to know more about becoming a foster parent, check out the National Foster Parent Association at nfponline.org. There's also faithfosterfamilies.org and adoptuskids.org. There's tons of other information online as well, so you can just hunt around. We also want to thank the supremely talented Christina Apostolopoulos for her beautiful original music. You can find her music on Spotify or Instagram at Christina Aposto. And also thank you to Yukon Har for his engineering. Thanks for listening, and if you like what you hear and you find it as valuable as we do, please rate us and hit subscribe. You can also make a donation at bonusbabies.org. See you next time.